Chichikov's purchases became the talk of the town. They started a series of debates, arguments, controversies as to whether or not the buying of peasants for resettlement was profitable. These discussions suggested that many were thoroughly familiar with the question. Of course, some maintained. There's no doubt at all about the land in the south being good and fertile. But how will Chichikov's peasants manage without water? Remember, there's no river running through his estates. Yes, but even the lack of water isn't the main drawback. Resettling is never sure to be a success. We know what a peasant feels like when he's placed on strange land and made to till the soil. Remember, he's got no house, no plot of his own, nothing. So you can be sure as 2 and 2 makes 4 that he'll run off, and you'll never get another whiff of him. Just a minute, my friend. Excuse me, I don't agree that Chichikov's peasants will run off. You mustn't forget that a Russian can get accustomed to anything and any climate. You can send him anywhere, to Kamchatka even if you wish. As long as you give him a pair of warm mittens, he'll stand slapping his hands together for a moment, then grab an axe and go and build himself a hut. That's all very well, but you're forgetting a very important factor. You haven't taken into consideration the sort of people Chichikov's peasants are. You've disregarded the fact that no landowner will have sold him a first-rate man. I'd bet my life that every one of Chichikov's peasants is either a thief or a hopeless drunkard, an idler or a violent character. Yes, I'll go along with you there. No one would sell good people, and Chichikov's lot must be a bunch of drunkards. But we must allow for the fact that it is precisely here that the moral of the story lies. They may be nothing but riffraff today, but over there, settled on new land, they may turn into excellent, loyal subjects. There have been many such instances in the world, and even in history. Never, declared the superintendent of state factories. Mark my words, that'll never happen. There will be 2 elements working against the peasants. Number 1, the proximity of the Ukrainian provinces in which, as you know, there's an unrestricted sale of wine. You can be sure that within a couple of weeks they'll have drunk themselves into a stupor. And number 2 is the habit of vagrancy a peasant is bound to acquire while he's being transplanted. That is, unless Chichikov keeps his eye on them constantly, handles them with gloves off, punishes them for the smallest mistake, and does it personally, not relying on someone else, but directly. He must even be ready to punch one of them in the nose when the occasion arises. Why should Chichikov go to all that bother and even go around hitting his people? He can get himself a supervisor for that. Is that so? Go and try and find a supervisor then. They're all a pack of thieves. They're thieves because their masters don't keep their eyes open, don't do what they should. That's right, many agreed. When the master knows something about his business and knows people, he's sure to have a good manager and supervisor. The supervisor of state factories, however, remarked that it would be unthinkable to find a good supervisor for less than 5,000 rubles. The president said that he could find one for about 3,000, to which the superintendent retorted, "And where would you find one for 3,000? Up your nose, maybe?" "Oh no," the president said, "not up my nose, but within our district. And his name is Peter Petrovich Samolov, and he's the man Chichikov needs for his peasants." Many felt very strongly for Chichikov, and the difficulties connected with such a large-scale movement frightened them. Some even feared an uprising of Chichikov's restless peasants. To this, the police chief replied that there was no need to worry about an uprising so long as there was a police force around, and that he had only to send his cap instead of going himself, and it would be enough to chase the peasants back to their quarters. Many others voiced opinions as to the best way of quieting the rebellious spirit of peasants. Opinions were of all sorts. Some smacked too much of disciplinary action and punishment. Others veered toward leniency. The postmaster said that Chichikov faced a sacred duty, that he had an opportunity to become a father of sorts, as he put it, to his peasants, and even of introducing some enlightenment. And on this occasion he praised the Lancastrian system of mutual education very highly. Such were the arguments going on all over town, and many persons, prompted by sympathy, imparted some of this advice to Chichikov personally, and even offered to form an escorting force for him to accompany the peasants to their new land. Chichikov thanked them for their advice, promised to take advantage of it when the occasion arose, but definitely rejected the idea of an escort, explaining that it was quite unnecessary, that the peasants he had bought were of peaceful disposition and felt favorably about the resettlement themselves, and that there was no question of their rising. All this talk, however, produced the most favorable results Chichikov could have hoped for. The rumor spread that he was nothing less than a millionaire. As we have seen at the beginning of the story, the town's inhabitants had taken Chichikov to their hearts anyhow. And now, after what had happened, they took him even closer. But to tell the truth, they were a rather kindly lot, lived in harmony, and were friendly with one another. The tone of their conversations bore the mark of a special kind of simplicity and openness. It went a bit like this. "My dear friend Ilya Ilyich." "Oh no, you listen here, brother Antipater Zakarievich. You're becoming completely lost in all your lies, Ivan Grigorievich." When talking to the postmaster, who was called Ivan Andreevich, they always added, for some reason, "Sprechen Sie Deutsch?" In brief, they were very much like one big happy family. Many of these people were not without education. The president, for instance, knew by heart Zhukovsky's poem Ludmilla, the novelty of which had not yet worn off at that time, and he recited it in masterly fashion. Recited certain passages such as the one starting, "The woods are sleepy, the valley slumbers," which contains further on the injunction, "Hush," at which point he would become so expressive that his audience could actually feel how the valley was sleeping, especially when, for even greater effect, the president closed his eyes. The postmaster went in more for philosophy and read quite assiduously, even at night. Jung's Night Thoughts and Eckhart Hausen's The Key to the Mysteries of Nature, taking lengthy notes, although no one ever discovered what they were about. But then he was a wit, turned a colorful phrase, and liked, as he said himself, to adorn his speech, and indeed he did adorn it with a multitude of little gems like, "The thing is, my dear sir, some such thing or other. Can you imagine? So to speak," etc. And these gems poured out of him like sand from a bag, though they weren't the only adornments he had to offer. He could also spice his conversation with very effective winks, which made some of his sarcastic hints even more caustic. The others were also more or less enlightened people. Some read Karamzin, others the Moscow News. Some even read nothing at all. Some were similar to rugs, that is, they had to be picked up and beaten to get the dust out of them. Others were slugs who just lay on their sides, and even a kicking or a beating wouldn't stir them. In any case, as we have already seen, they were all respectable, reliable people, and there were no consumptives among them. They were all gentlemen of the sort whom, in tender intimacy, their wives called dumpling, fatso, tummy, Fido, pussycat, or some such. Generally speaking, they were very kind-hearted and hospitable, and anyone who had partaken of their food and had passed an evening playing cards came to be considered as someone close. This was even truer in Chichikov's case because he knew so well the secrets of how to charm and to please. They became so fond of him that he could find no way of leaving the town, and all he heard was, "Just one more week, please. Stay with us just 1 week more, dear Mr. Chichikov." In short, they coddled him like a baby. But even more striking, really a subject for amazement, was the impression Chichikov made on the ladies. In order to account for it even partially, we would have to dwell at length upon the ladies in question, on their social life, to paint, as they say, in live colors their spiritual attitudes, etc. But this would be extremely difficult for me. On the one hand, I am held back by my boundless respect for the spouses of these high dignitaries, and on the other, it is simply too much hard work. The ladies of the town were... No, I really cannot. I am overwhelmed with awe. I cannot even raise my pen. It's as if it were filled with lead. All right then, I'll leave the description of their characters to someone who has vivid colors on his palette, and who has more of them than I do, and content myself with saying a couple of words about their looks and other superficial matters. The ladies of the town were what is called presentable, and in this respect they could easily be held up as models for all other ladies. As to their behavior, maintaining the right tone, sticking to the proper etiquette, distinguishing the most subtle nuances, and especially following the fashions in all their minutest detail, well, they even outdid the ladies of Moscow and Petersburg and all that. They dressed with great taste and drove around in carriages with footmen wearing gold-braided livery, as prescribed by the latest mode. A visiting card was essential, even if it was nothing but a name scribbled on a deuce of clubs or an ace of diamonds. It was because of the failure of one of them to pay a return visit and leave her visiting card that two of the ladies, excellent friends and even related to each other, broke off once and for all. And the efforts of their husbands and other relatives to reconcile them proved once more that if there's one thing that's impossible to achieve in this world, it's to make one lady forgive another who has failed to return a visit. And so the two ladies had to remain in, as it was called in the town, a state of mutual incompatibility. Then, many violent scenes were caused by matters of precedence, an aspect that on occasion turned husbands into knights in shining armor. Of course, no duel ever took place, since these gentlemen were civil servants. But to make up for this, one would try to play a dirty trick on the other behind his back, which, as we know, can often have more drastic consequences than a duel. In their morals, the ladies of the town were severe and full of noble indignation concerning every vice and temptation, castigating weaknesses mercilessly. And if something private was going on among them, they did keep it private and never showed a sign that it was going on. Thus decorum was preserved, and the husband himself was so conditioned that, even if he were to see or hear anything, he'd say simply and sensibly, "Whose business is that, if John with Janie sat?" It must also be noted that the ladies of the town were, like so many Petersburg ladies, extremely precise and genteel in the choice of words and expressions. They never said, "I blew my nose," "I sweated," or "I spat," but rather conveyed this by, "I had to make use of my handkerchief." Never would one of them announce that a glass or a plate stank, nor would she even say anything that might suggest such a state of affairs. Instead, she would say, "This glass seems to be misbehaving," or the equivalent. In order to make the Russian language even more elevated, half the Russian words were thrown out, and this forced them to use French fairly often. But when they spoke French, it was quite a different matter. In French, it was all right to use words that were much stronger than the ones we have mentioned above. I have found it possible to impart this superficial information on the ladies of the town. But, of course, if you look deeper, you'd find many other things. It is, however, dangerous to look too deeply into ladies' hearts, and so I shall continue simply skimming the surface. At first, the ladies displayed no special interest in Chichikov, albeit fully acknowledging his pleasant manners. But when the rumor spread that he was a millionaire, they discovered new qualities in him. It must be said, though, that the ladies were not money-mad, and the fault lies with the word millionaire. It was not the millionaire as a person, but the word itself, because the very sound of the word acts somehow on out-and-out villains, on so-so people, and on very nice people alike. A millionaire has the advantage that he can observe servility in a completely disinterested form, servility in all its purity, not based on any schemes and calculations. Many, although they have no hope of getting anything out of it, will rush ahead to hold the door open for him, will laugh at his jokes, take off their hats to him, and try by all possible means to be invited to a dinner he is expected to attend. We do not wish to imply that the ladies' increased interest in Chichikov was due to any ulterior motive. However, in many drawing rooms, people started saying that, although Chichikov was not a man of striking beauty, he cut a rather fine figure, and that it was a very good thing that he was not fatter or heavier than he was, adding at the same time a deprecating remark about thin men, who were said to be more like toothpicks than human beings. Some ladies appeared in public wearing new dresses. There was a hustle and bustle at the marketplace. So many carriages appeared there that it looked as though society had gathered for a picnic. The merchants were pleasantly surprised to find that there was suddenly a great demand for lengths of material they'd been unable to sell thus far because the price they'd asked was too high. Then, during a church service, a lady appeared in a hoop skirt so wide that it filled half the aisle. The constable on duty ordered the public to move farther back, that is, toward the church porch, to avoid crumpling the dress of the wife of an important official, and Chichikov himself could not help noticing the extraordinary attention paid to him. Once, when he returned home, he found a letter on his desk. He could not find out who had brought it or where it had come from. All the inn servant could say was that the person who had brought it wished to remain unidentified. The letter began with great determination, thus: "No, I must write to you." Then it explained what was meant by the secret sympathy between two hearts. This revelation ended in suspension marks extending over half a line. Then there were a few thoughts which were rather remarkable for their aptness, so that we feel obliged to reproduce them here. What is life? It is a valley where sorrows dwell. What is society? A crowd that cannot feel. After this, the lady letter writer mentioned that she was dampening the lines with tears and thinking of her beloved mother, who had departed this world 25 years before, and proceeded to invite Chichikov to come with her into the wilderness, leaving behind forever the stifling town within whose narrow boundaries there was not enough air to breathe. The letter ended on a note of despair, culminating in the following verse: "A couple of doves will lead you to my cold, sad bier, and cooing they will tell you, she died shedding a tear." The poem did not scan too well, but no matter, since the letter was written in the spirit of the time. It was not signed. No first name, no second name, nothing. Not even the day or the month. But then the postscript claimed that his own heart would guess the author, and that the next day at the ball in the governor's mansion, the original herself would be present. Chichikov became quite intrigued by this. There were so many things in the anonymous letter that were tempting and curious that he reread it twice, then a third time, and finally said, "I'd be very curious to find out who she is." As can be gauged from this, the affair was taking a serious turn. He thought about it for more than an hour, and finally, spreading wide his arms and lowering his head, he said, "The letter is written in a very ornate style, like curled hair." After that, it goes without saying, the letter was folded and put away in his box, beside a theater ticket and an invitation to a wedding that he had kept stored away for 7 years. Soon after, as was to be expected, an invitation arrived for the governor's ball, a quite routine matter in provincial towns. Where there's a governor, there's bound to be a ball, because otherwise he would lose the love and respect of the local notables. All other business was immediately postponed and put aside, and Chichikov's full attention was given to preparations for the ball. There was every reason for him to look forward to it with excitement, and perhaps never, since the very creation of the world, has a man spent so much time making himself elegant. 1 whole hour was spent simply examining himself in the mirror. He tried to communicate to his face a variety of expressions, including the calm, majestic aspect of a person conscious of his dignity, but nevertheless smiling and friendly. And another, a simply polite but unsmiling expression. Then, facing the mirror, he bowed several times, accompanying each bow with nondescript sounds somewhat resembling French, although Chichikov didn't know a single French word. He pleasantly surprised himself several times by winking, raising an eyebrow, twitching a lip, and making a strange noise with his tongue. In one word, he did many things that one can do when one is alone in a room and feels that one is irresistible and, at the same time, is sure that no one is peeping through the keyhole. Finally, he patted himself lightly on the chin, muttered, "A pretty nice mug," and proceeded to dress. He was in a very good mood while dressing, and when putting on his suspenders and tying his tie, he clicked his heels, bowed particularly gracefully, and though he never danced, performed an entrechat. This entrechat produced a small, quite innocuous effect. The dressing table shook, and a hairbrush fell to the floor.